बता सकते हैं। तो ये कुछ ऐसी distinctions हैं जो हमें समझनी जरूरी है. Otherwise, the scales are the same what we read right from here. Apart from this, we have three major postulates or the three basic rules without which you will not be able to again conduct any of the steps in the data that you collect. When we went on to experimental method, basic method वही है जो आप practical file में लिखते हैं. आपका वो experience जो है वो कैसा है? Objectivity एक major dimension है, choice of scale या apparatus एक major dimension है. So that means what are the basic, what experimental method means, उपज कब हुई सबसे पहले और आज हम कहाँ तक पहुँचे in terms of experiment, which means you can start discussing with William Wood to today what are the kind of researches that are going on. You must have a few examples ready to be able to explain the experimental method a little better, so that it is a little different from what you have already learned. What is the genesis? क्यों ज़रूरत महसूस हुई experimental method शुरू करने की? ये सब हम normally BA level में नहीं बात करते हैं, लेकिन at MA it's important for us to understand that behaviorism was around the corner, quantification of data was an important determinant. So these are the kind of factors that underplayed to the emergence of the experimental method, becoming a very important dimension of all kind of research in psychology. Because primarily the use of apparatuses that we do in psychology helps us not only to quantify but also objectify and then generalize. So ये कहीं ना कहीं सब चीजें जुड़ी हुई हैं. जितना आपका स्टडी ऑब्जेक्टिव होगा, उतना साइंटिफिक होगा, उतना उसका आउटकम इन द डिजायर्ड डायरेक्शन होगा, एंड यू कैन देन जनरलाइज फॉर द पॉपुलेशन जिनके ऊपर आपने वो एक्सपेरिमेंट शुरू किया. सो हर चीज कहीं ना कहीं आपस में रिलेटेड है, कनेक्टेड है. और तभी जब आप अपना प्रोजेक्ट बनाना शुरू करेंगे, इन सब अहम सवालों को दिमाग में रखेंगे कि आपने स्टेप 1 कैसे एंटर करना है इनटू द जोन ऑफ रिसर्च. रिव्यू ऑफ लिटरेचर प्लेड अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल. आपने कौन से वो जर्नल्स हैं या कौन सी किताबें हैं जिनको पढ़ना है, कंसल्ट करना है, जिनकी बेसिस पे आपकी बेसिक फाउंडेशन जो है ऑफ योर रिसर्च will है. Now apart from these important dimensions, ethics is yet another very important dimension for us. जब तक हमारे को अपने ethics straight नहीं है, we will be doing injustice to the people with whom we are working. The people who are called participants or they are called subjects. Right? So we will go on right from the beginning की ethics की शुरुआत कब हुई, क्यों ज़रूरी महसूस हुआ कि ethics को पढ़ना चाहिए. So as early as that till date, what is the scenario, right? So now your approach towards every question has to be a brief introduction, define the term, where historically it started to where is it today. For example, APA is given the major credit for formulating the ethics for us. But then in 2023, where are we in terms of APA, right? Any questions you have in your mind? So ethics is the study of proper action. Obviously, when we deal with research, we are talking about action. We are talking about stimulus and response and the interplay that goes between the two. Research ethics concerns the responsibility of the researcher to be honest, respectful, and all those major dimensions that we keep in mind. As far as the responsibility is concerned, we can keep humans and non-humans both in mind. As early as 1945, the Nuremberg Code which came up. And why there was a need for this code to come up? Because during World War II, the Nazis did so much atrocities on the Nazis. A lot of atrocities were done, and that was for the first time that there was a need that was felt कि इनकी भी आवाज़ सुननी चाहिए. And that's where the sense of responsibility in terms of the clinicians or the researchers that came into the forefront. And that is the time when the IRB was set up. Way back 64, when for the first time ethical issues constitution was made, institutional review board as it is called. Every country has a IRB constituted to check what is the kind of research, किसी किस्म का गलत तो नहीं हो रहा है. अब आप देखिए जो क्रूअल्टी अगेंस्ट एनिमल्स वाला ग्रुप है, उन्होंने किस हद तक चले गए हैं कि अब all kinds of experimentation on animals has been stopped. Similarly for human beings also, and that's where IRB plays a very major role in the kind of rules and regulations and the ethics which will be set up for humans and non-humans. Now the 30-year TUSPE syphilis study, which was conducted on 300 black rural men, keywords: 300 black rural men, right? Black is racist. You are prejudiced against a particular community. Then you are working in rural population, not urban, because urban people are supposed to be literate people. They will ask you questions. क्यों कर रहे हो? क्या करोगे? क्या? How sure are you that I am suffering from syphilis? If it's a community study, if patients are reporting in hospitals, it's different. But usually such studies are done in community to identify the number of cases who are suffering from syphilis. Now syphilis, you all understand, is a sexual sexually acquired infection. So that was another important dimension when ethics came into being, that you cannot classify a particular strata of population and say we want to conduct the study on you. That black men are prone to syphilis. Where is it? It's wrong. So these kind of prejudices came into the forefront. Then the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. So biomedical is when we are talking about clinical dimensions, and behavioral research is when we are talking about participants in psychology, participants in sociology, all those dimensions that deal with behavioral science, psychiatry for example. So the three general ethical principles were brought to the forefront: beneficence, the respect, and the justice. These are the three major dimensions which were very important. Now this is a flow chart which is created to understand ethics at depth. The first is the area of ethical concern. The second is the ethical dilemmas, ethical guidelines, ethical issues in research. Finally, the ethics of animals or the non-human research groups. When we deal with area of ethical concern, we talk about relationship between society and science, the professional issues. Finally, the treatment of research participants. What should be your behavior towards individuals with whom you are working, vis-a-vis one individual at a time or a community or the society as a whole. Ethical dilemmas, we all understand. When you are wanting to do a particular research study, you know participants will not agree, तो हम बहुत बार क्या करते हैं, उनसे consent नहीं लेते, उनकी privacy को impinge करते हैं. So what are we doing? Those are the dilemmas करो कि रहने, मेरा काम रह जाएगा. आप लैब तक पार्टिसिपेंट को या सब्जेक्ट को ले जाते हैं और फिर वो कहता है मैं नहीं करूँगा, तो आप उसको प्रॉमिस करते हैं चीज़ें कि मैं तुमको ट्रीट दूंगा, मैं तुमको खिलाऊंगा. What is this? This is a dilemma. एक हमारे स्टेट में you go into a state of conflict कि shall I follow the ethics कि consent लेके पार्टिसिपेंट की रज़ानामी लेके तो ही आगे बढ़ो, या फिर let me go ahead, देखी जाएगी जो होगा, ethics कहीं मारो. So that's where the ethical dilemmas come into the forefront. The guidelines deal with the beneficence and the non-beneficence. When we are talking about beneficence, we are talking about how beneficial our research will be to mankind or to that particular participant. आपका participant जब memory drum के ऊपर काम करने जाता है, उसकी short term memory आप test करते हैं, तो क्या उसका कोई फायदा हो रहा है? अब जब हम बेनिफिशियंस की बात कर रहे हैं, तो वहाँ पे हम दूसरे को नुकसान नहीं देना चाहते. Right? If the patient cannot see the apparatus or the numbers clearly, we will not force him to see it. या उसका distance को कम या ज़्यादा कर देंगे, depending on his comfort zone. So these are important dimensions that we keep in mind. Fidelity and responsibility, again, whenever a participant or a subject is with us, we are conducting research, he or she is our responsibility. उसको शौक नहीं लगना चाहिए, उसको किसी किस्म का दुख नहीं होना चाहिए. बहुत बार हमारे सवाल उनकी privacy या उनकी confidentiality को bypass करता है. That should not be the intention when you are doing research. It should be with consent and something which is conducive to both of you, so that the outcome is in the desired direction. आपका subject सब झूठ बोलेगा तो क्या फायदा? आपका sense of responsibility आपने कहीं ना कहीं break किया. Integrity, again we all understand what integrity means. That we are responsible, we are honest, we are just, we want to do no harm to our subject. Justice. The next is respect for people's rights and dignity. Again, we understand what right and dignity means. Ethical issues in research, institutional approval is very important. For example, the projects that you will be conducting over here, the institution gives you an approval that you can go ahead. जब आप अपना synopsis जमा करते हैं, आपका जो भी guide होता है, he or she will say, okay, you go ahead with these. That's where institutional approval. एक larger scale पे जब आप research करते हैं, there can be a panel of researchers who can sit and approve or disapprove of a project because they feel that it is doing justice to participants or it is bypassing their integrity or it is bypassing their privacy. तो ये research आपको नहीं करनी चाहिए. तो आपका institution आपको approval ही नहीं देगा to go ahead with research like that. Informed consent, we all understand. Participant has to agree and the participant has a right to walk out of your research at any given time. Halfway through also if the participant feels the study is not up to the mark या मेरा कोई फायदा नहीं है, I'm not enjoying it and I want to drop out, you cannot say no, you cannot drop out. He has a right or she has a right to drop out at any given time. Debriefing, as I explained earlier, once the entire experiment is done, we give the brief to our subject. आपसे इसलिए data collect किया गया, this is the objective of my study. After the results are interpreted, I can even give you some guidelines on how you can improve yourself. For example, memory. 20 meaningful, 4-letter meaningful words were shown to the participant. He was able to recall just 2. We will obviously want to understand why was he or she not able to recollect more than 2 words. So there's a big question mark there. So that's where debriefing comes into play, that you will then start to understand. He or she can say, I was only physically present, mentally I was elsewhere. I'm a little upset with something. You said, please help me, so I came up to the lab. ये जरूरी नहीं है कि नहीं तो मैं अगर चाहता तो मुझे 20 के 20 शब्द याद हो सकते थे. But I was not there when you were doing this entire thing. You did not give me the right instructions. That could also be one reason that the patient can say or the subject can say. So that's where debriefing comes into play, where we not only inform the subject about the objectives of the study, but we also tell him the interpretation and the way ahead from there, which means some amount of counseling can be done on the basis of the research that you have conducted. Debriefing is usually done for individuals who are keen to understand. A lot of times people don't even care. Debriefing is important for people who are interested in research, are interested in finding out why, how, what, when, can I improve. So when you are asked such questions, debriefing is a very important dimension, and it is the right of the subject or the participant to know what all he has undergone. Coercion and freedom to decline participation. I just explained this. Confidentiality, anonymity and privacy. 3 important dimensions, the rights of which are with the subject at all given time. You cannot get into anybody's world. Everybody has their own little ब्यूटीफुल वर्ल्ड. आप उसकी दुनिया में तभी प्रवेश कर सकते हैं जब वो आपको इजाजत देगा. Otherwise, it's better to stay out of their lives and out of their mindsets. For example, your first session of counseling always says rapport building, right? What is happening in rapport building? You are trying to connect with your subject. And when the patient doesn't want to connect with you, he will just keep quiet, not look eye to eye, have no kind of communication with you, verbal or non-verbal. And that's the message that goes to the researcher. Stop here to try exercise. We move further to the ethics of non-humans. Justification, the personnel, care and housing, acquisition, experiments, field research, educational use. All of these dimensions have to be kept in mind, irrespective of who your client or your subject is, human or non-human. Care and housing becomes very important if you are working with animals. We all understand in the Skinner box 24 hours when you are keeping the animal hungry, how important it is to keep the animal protected and keep checking on the animal every little while, that because of hunger and starvation, I hope the animal doesn't die or the human being doesn't collapse because of certain things that you have stopped because you want to see the outcome in your experiment. So that's where these dimensions become very important, and whenever we are doing any kind of research, a clear-cut objective justification has to be there. Why you want to conduct that research? What will be the outcome? How will it benefit the individual or the society at large? जो हम ये generalization of results बोलते हैं, this is for the benefit of the individual and the society at large. So these are dimensions that you keep in mind. Field research, until now you understand what it means, the importance of going into the field and collecting data and bringing it back, which means you're not only dealing with one individual at a time, you could be dealing with 500 or 1,000 people at one time. So to keep in mind the current mental status of all those people and not hampering them in any way is where ethics comes into play. Any question you have until now? We move further, picking up each dimension at a time. Research ethics. Ethics is a set of principles that assist the community of researchers within the social and behavioral sciences. Ethical concerns can be divided into three basic areas. The first being relationship between society and science, professional issues, and treatment of research participants. Again, loads and loads of money is being spent on research all the time. Whether the outcome will be in the desired direction or not, we are not sure of. COVID-19, for example, when it came, we had no guidelines. And so we all thought that sitting within the confines of the four walls would do us good, save us from COVID. Yet a lot of people suffered from COVID. In spite of being in isolation, being alienated, being lonely. Now these are dimensions which are psychological harm, which is the outcome of COVID, which we are facing until date. So these are important and have to be kept in mind. Now when we talk about society and science, corporate support of research can be good. The APA 2010, a standard stating that psychologists should refrain from engaging in professional activities when they have a conflict of interest. For example, COVID-19, can you think of an example where there can be a conflict of interest? Any one example. आपको लग रहा है कि ये बहुत ज़रूरी है and the participant feels that ये गलत है. Any one example that you can think of. Legal case of?
जो केस है वो अगेंस्ट जज की बेटी का है तो जज उसको
can be okay. No, let's talk in terms of a researcher in psychology vis-a-vis, that is a legal framework. keeping your participant hungry. अभी तक तो हम animals को ही रखते थे. You want to now conduct studies on human beings, keeping them hungry for some time and see the behavior pattern. Right? You are attaching them to certain electrodes, which he is scared of. MRI कराने के लिए हम पेशेंट को भेजते हैं ना जब MRI मशीन में. We are trying to understand the neural networks in the individual's mind. We are trying to advance cognitive science. Yes, please. In the name of advancement of cognitive sciences, look at the fear and the trauma that the patient undergoes. आपकी तो research हो रही है. Look at the state of the patient who has been told that you have a problem, so we need to understand your neural networks. हो सकता है कि कईयों में genuinely neural networks में दिक्कत हो, बाकियों को as controls अंदर डाला जाएगा. Do you follow what I'm saying? Yes. So there is a conflict of interest. आप अपनी research को advance कर रहे हैं, cognitive sciences are advancing, but on the other hand, you are subjecting individuals or human beings to such anxiety, such anxious movements that going and getting stuck in that MRI machine for 15 minutes can be traumatic for some people. Right? Not everybody can comfortably go into that machine and come back. It's not a happy experience. It can be traumatic. So that's where the ACA or the APA ethics code, you have to take their consent. They have to agree to it. There has to be no conflict of interest in terms of advancement of science or advancement of research in that particular field. Apart from this, in December 2000, the US Office of Science and Technology came out with a policy. They also defined research misconduct as fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism. Plagiarism, incidentally, I must tell you that for your projects also over here, if your work is more than 20% found high on plagiarism, which हम cut, copy, paste वाली research करते हैं, your thesis, your project report is not acceptable. It is rejected and you are asked to redo the entire task. So any kind of falsification or plagiarism, ये जो cut, copy research, copy paste वाली research है, that is against the ethics and not acceptable by the research academia or the group. You must keep that in mind. Now there is a research protocol which reads the purpose of the research. जैसे मैंने पहले बोला, आपको अपना objective clear होना बहुत जरूरी है. What is the purpose? आप क्यों करना चाहते हैं वो research? Relevant background and rationale of the research. ये कहाँ से उभर के आएगा? जितना आप review of literature करेंगे, वहाँ से आपका rationale उभरेगा. Relevance, why you want to conduct that? क्योंकि in the past such researches are not done or there is little research. I feel that we need to explore this further. Now these are guidelines for also formulating your research project in your courses. Right? Keep these in mind. The participant population, sample कौन होगा? कहाँ से लेंगे आप sample? Right? How will you contact that sample? Student sample is the simplest sample. हर कोई student sample बनाने की कोशिश कर रहा है. 18 to 23 years old, पता है सबको कॉलेज में बहुत बच्चे इधर से डेटा कलेक्ट हो जाएगा over and out. What is new about it? What is unique about it? How are you different from the others? And that's where you leave a bent in terms of research. Experimental design and methodology. There are children who do pick up experimental designs and their outcomes are beautiful, keeping in mind the pros and cons of that outcome. Incentives offered, if any, you must keep that in mind. तो मेरे लिए ये कर दो, मैं तुम्हारे लिए कर दूँगा. So that's the deal that is set between the participant and the experimenter. Risk and benefit to the participant and the precautions to be taken. Privacy and confidentiality of the data collected. Now there's always this star under your performer, which reads, this data will stay confidential. Your name and other details will not be shared. The second star reads, this data is being collected for research purposes only, which means cannot publish it in newspapers, put it in magazines where it can become a तहलका जैसे कि कल के news बन जाएगी आपका ये reporting, right? So our endeavor is only to advance research so that newer interventions, newer theories can come, a new thought process can be initiated, and that is the basic goal of research, not creating tehलका. What Republic India and these news channels are doing. इतनी सी खबर मिली, उसको bloat up करके इतना बड़ा बना देते हैं, right? These are like those big plump stories which you hear, and after a few days they just fade off as if nothing happened. Research which is documented in journals stays for years and years and centuries. We do trace back researches 1909. We still give credit to William Boone for initiating the first experimental lab because it's documented. It is evidence. News articles come today, they fade off tomorrow. But research stays forever. Particularly if it's innovative and unique kind of research that you want to do. So professional issues, overlooking others and use of flawed data. बहुत बारी आपको प्रोजेक्ट में कहा जाता है कि कम से कम 200 का डेटा कलेक्ट करके लाइए, आप 20-25 का कलेक्ट करते हैं, बाकी का सब फैब्रिकेट कर देते हैं, सेम से तो रिजल्ट है, बाकी बच्चों ने भी यही रिस्पॉन्स दिया था, तो ठीक है 20-25 का ले लिया, बाकियों का अपने आप से कोड एंटर किया, हो गया काम. That's flawed data. So outcome cannot be in the desired direction. क्या फायदा रिसर्च करने का अगर आप सब फॉल्स करेंगे और फ्लॉज भरा हुआ रिसर्च होगा. Failing to present data, contradicting one's own work, changing the design, methodology or results of the study in response to the pressure from a funding source. A lot of times researchers are funded by certain organizations, particularly researchers in medical science which are funded by pharmaceutical units. Now pharmaceutical units are trying to promote their own drugs, their own line of medication or treatments or protocols, which may ethically be wrong and not acceptable. But because the funding unit wants you to say, Maneka Gandhi says दूध पीना मना है, तो सबने दूध पीना मना कर दिया. So and so says no, milk is so nutritious. Every child, every adult, every elderly must drink milk. So people start. Broccoli is very good for health. Everybody starts eating. The day it comes, oh, green color is bad. This chlorophyll can create problems in your gut. So you stop having it. So where is the cut-off line which says this is right and this is wrong? We need to identify the source of information and not start believing just anything which comes that way. So that's where changing the design, the results of the study in response to the pressure from a funding source or circumventing minor aspects of human participant requirements, while these practices do not approach the seriousness of fabrication, falsification or plagiarism. They are of concern to the profession, especially as Martinson, Anderson and DeVries in 2005 have revealed that more than a third of US scientists surveyed admitting to engaging in one or more of these practices in the last 3 years. Which means people are ready, when they make these mistakes, they are also, when they are caught, they accept that funding agency wanted us to do this. Similarly, like what happened with the COVID vaccines. You all are reading all the things that are coming up. Are you reading? Are you keeping in line? COVID vaccine? Which is the best vaccine? बहुत बड़ा प्रश्न चिन्ह है उसके आगे. A lot of people are reporting problems and everybody attributes it all to the COVID vaccine, right? Whether to take the booster dose or not to take the booster dose, again a question mark, because there are doubts that have been created in our mind. Similarly, treatments. Now this 1995 US News and World Report published an article on once secret record of the government-sponsored or funded radiation experiments carried out between 1944 and 1974 during time, more than 4,000 radiation experiments were conducted on tens of thousands of Americans for the dual purpose of learning more about the effects of radiation. So if you read the key word over here, radiation and human population, what is going to be the outcome? अब एक ऐसी परिस्थिति क्रिएट करनी पड़ती है जहाँ पर रेडिएशन दी जा रही है और उसका फिर बाद में कुछ समय बाद इफेक्ट देखा जाता है, right? What happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan? The consequences are evident in the World War II time, right? What is happening? People still are formed, babies are born deformed because of the huge effect of radiation. So we must understand that the kind of experiments, the kind of work that is done, and how much of ethics we are following for it. Why am I giving you these examples? So that you truly understand that in psychology also we are governed by all these ethics. किसी भी लेवल पे कोई भी पकड़ा जाता है. For example, MA करके बहुत बच्चे अपनी काउंसलिंग यूनिट खोलते हैं without getting a RCI recognition. You can be challenged in the court of law at any given time. Since you do not have a RCI recognition, you cannot sit in the market and start saying I am a counselor. You need to have a RCI recognition. 2 years of having worked in a clinical setup or do another course from a RCI recognized institution which gives you the license to start practicing. Otherwise, you are going against the... Now these are again examples of the dilemmas that people have. I've given you some experiments when you're working with orphans, what happens when you're working, like on the radiation example, what happens. Now this is one experiment of the dilemma of Dr. Wendy Johnson in the year, which is also called the Bonston experiment. This was done June 2001, where the researcher, to validate his theory, experimented with 22 orphans at an Iowa orphanage. Half of the orphans were given positive speech therapy and the other half were induced to stutter by his graduate assistant, Mary Tudor. Now what is happening? Normal बच्चों को कहा जा रहा है कि आप stutter करके बात करिए. And over a period of time, experiment के दौरान ही कई बच्चों ने, normal बच्चों ने भी stuttering शुरू कर दिया. से कहीं ना कहीं एक gross irregularity है कि हम अपनी stuttering की research को बढ़ावा देने के लिए हमने बच्चों को, normal बच्चों को stuttering यानी कि speech disorder वाले बच्चे बना दिए. Mary Tudor will not be forgiven for this huge crime that she committed, which was not intended by the researcher, but she felt कि अगर मैं ऐसे करूँगी तो research ज़्यादा अच्छा, मतलब outcome ज़्यादा अच्छा होगा, कि बच्चों को practice करा देती हूँ stutter कैसे करके कैसे बात करते. Do you understand what stuttering is?
Yes.
Speech disorder. So she induced that during training to those subjects. So the dilemma obviously is very clear. 5 general aspiration और model ये आपने शुरू में बिल्कुल first slide में जो देखे थे, the 5 major dimensions, and ज़्यादातर हम इन्हीं 5 को पढ़ते हैं और इन्हीं में से 12 हिस्से बना लेते हैं ethics के, जो अब तक आप लोग पढ़ते रहे. As I said earlier, beneficence means doing good for others. Non-maleficence means doing no harm to others. So whenever you are conducting research, that is our basic aim, that we create no kind of dilemma for our subject. He is safe, he is comfortable, he feels nice after having completed the entire experiment. And not that you become Mary Tudor and say that I can't do it anymore. So these are all the examples which have been done when you are doing research. Research conducted in established or commonly accepted educational settings. Largely, psychology research is done in educational settings because that data is easiest to get. And there is so much work you can do on children who come to schools, children who go to higher education institutions because of the fact that they are in that mode, अभी वो growing mode है. उनसे जो भी आप सवाल, आप लोगों से अब जो भी सवाल पूछा जाता है, कहीं ना कहीं इम्प्रिंट हो जाता है दिमाग में, और वो आजीवन के लिए आपकी गाइडलाइन बन जाती है. कोई सही चीजें सिखाई जाती है तो वो भी याद रहती है, कुछ गलत बताया जाए वो भी खूबसूरती से बच्चे फॉलो करते हैं, क्योंकि उनके जो आइडियल है या जो उन्हें वो सवाल पूछ रहे थे वो उन्हें आइडियलाइज करने लगते कि हाँ उन्होंने कहा था तो शायद सही होगा. तो वो एक प्रश्न चिन्ह की जगह जीवन का एक फॉलो करने का एक तरीका बन जाता है. So that's why a lot of research which is done in educational settings, normal educational practices such as research on regular special education instruction strategies, research on the effectiveness of a comparison between instructional techniques, curricula or classroom management methods. So that's why I said earlier, बहुत किस्म की research हो सकती है educational institutions. Research involving use of educational tests, cognitive, diagnostic, aptitude, achievement, or observation of public behavior. Children are conscious at this time, how they dress up, how others dress up. The minute you step out of the campus, you see a lot of boys and girls smoking. Accepted normal life these days. They all want to get together in the evening party and also drink and abuse drugs. That's also becoming normal. So how far these behavior patterns are considered right or wrong is the distinction which researchers are trying to draw. And that's what all this research talks about. The information received from these individuals, any disclosure of the information outside research. Research focuses on behavior such as illegal conduct, drug use, sexual behavior, use of alcohol, research involving the use of educational tests. You are all on that brink where you have to think of what career you will make for yourself, right? So that's where diagnostic tools or career profiling come into play. मैं आज से 5 साल बाद कहाँ हूँगा, बहुत उनको पता ही नहीं होता, हमारा aim clear नहीं है. There are some who are very clear. They have chalked out 2 years this, the next 5 years this, the next 5 years this. So that's another important dimension of research which is done on students in higher education. Participants are elected or appointed public officials or candidates for public office, such as the election scenarios in colleges. होता है ना, किसी के अंदर वो leadership skill दिखता है या quality दिखती है तो he says I'm going to fight the election. And over time that becomes his profession also. Nobody in the family is from that background, but the child has that caliber and the potential and proves himself very well. Federal statutes require without exception that the confidentiality of the personally identifiable information will be maintained throughout the research and thereafter. Research involving the collection or study of existing data, documents, records, pathological specimens or diagnostic specimens, if these sources are publicly available or if the information is recorded by the investigator. Now we are talking over here not just about empirical research, we are also talking about secondary research. So remember the difference between the two? What is the difference between empirical research and secondary research? पिछले सेमेस्टर में पढ़ा है आपने? Yes. And secondly, yeah, sources of data which are already documented. जो journals पढ़े हैं already lab में, library में, जो literature published है, उसको जब आप reread करते हैं, those are secondary sources of information. Census of data. Last census conducted 2011, right? So that forms the foundation of building up our research program. So we must understand whether we want to do secondary research or we want to do empirical research. या फिर secondary research से अपना foundation तैयार करिए और फिर उसको empirical research में convert करिए. तो कितनी खूबसूरती से आप वो कर पाते हैं, keeping the ethics in mind, not impinging on others' privacy or confidentiality, and coming out with the outcomes is what is keeping the ethics in mind. Now when you talk about expedited review, we are again talking about the review of literature. क्या क्या sources को tap करना है, कहाँ से वो sources मिलेंगे, कितनी information pick up करनी है, कितनी छोड़नी है. These are important for us to understand. Otherwise, it becomes irrelevant to conduct research. Research involving data, documents, records, or specimens that have been collected for non-research purposes. Now when we are talking about non-research purposes, we are trying to understand what goes on. Emotional intelligence पे आप research करना चाहते हैं. होती क्या है emotional intelligence? उपज कहाँ से हुई emotional intelligence? अब तक किस sample पे काम हुआ? आप कौन सा नया dimension ढूंढेंगे ताकि आप existing body of knowledge में contribute कर पाए. So that's where the expedited reviews come into play. The third category of review is a full board review, which means the entire panel of researchers has to agree on the kind of researches you want to conduct or you will conduct and subsequently make it relevant for yourself. Fidelity and responsibility, I am not going into the details. By now you understand what it means to be responsible, that your participant or the subject is safe, not subjected to any kind of harm, and you are not even deceiving your subject. आप झूठ बोल के उससे डेटा नहीं कलेक्ट करते. So deception का जो dimension है वो भी वहीं पर बहुत खूबसूरती से फिट इन होता है. जब हम integrity की बात करते हैं, psychologists try to be honest, accurate, truthful, both in teaching, research. So that's where your integrity comes up on the surface. Uncover the mysteries of behavior to acquire knowledge. Justice. We all understand what justice means. Yes? Respect for people's rights and dignity. We appreciate people's right of privacy, confidentiality, self-determinism. मुझे आपके साथ काम नहीं करना मतलब नहीं करना. You can't force your participant to work. You respect the person, you respect the decision that the other person takes, and you go on looking for another subject. Again, these ethical codes set up by APA first of all in October 2002. An important dimension which was spoken about was the informed consent. That no research should be step 2. First step has to be informed consent, and that was first done primarily in 2002. Informed consent, we all understand the kind of information which is shared, the understanding that is developed between the subject and the participant. बहुत बार लोग initially मना करते हैं, लेकिन जब आप अपनी research के बारे में बताते हैं, they get interested, and then they may say, okay, I'll agree. So ये आप अपने subject को कैसे approach करते हैं, that's very important to keep in mind. Voluntary participation. Assent agreement from a minor to participate in research. When we are talking about assent, we are talking in terms of the parents taking the decision. बच्चों से आमतौर पे इसीलिए जब आप स्कूल में रिसर्च कंडक्ट करने जाते हैं, आपको पहले प्रिंसिपल के थ्रू जाना पड़ता है. प्रिंसिपल आपको रेफर करते हैं स्कूल कोऑर्डिनेटर के पास में या कोई एप्रोप्रिएट टीचर के पास में, वो फिर अपना टाइम निकाल के आपको देते हैं. So for children, whenever you have to do research, you either approach through school authorities or through the parents. The children cannot be caught and taken their data from. Very important to keep this in mind. Parents or guardians. Deception again can be of two types: passive deception and active deception. Now when you are talking about passive deception, it's withholding or omitting of information, which means you are intentionally not sharing the objective. आप थोड़ा सा अपना बता देते हैं रिसर्च का, जो मूल चीज है वो नहीं बताते हैं, because you feel the patient or the subject may not want to conduct the research with you. So that's where it is passive. Active is presenting of misinformation about the study. So पूरा झूठ बोल दिया और उसका हैप्पी कर दिया कि हाँ सब बढ़िया है, और बाद में उसको MRI के लिए उसको मशीन पर लगा दिया. So these are researches that have been done using deception. We must read about the kind of researches that are being done, picking up deception as a major dimension. And also important to keep in mind कि जब आप अपने पार्टिसिपेंट को डिसीव करके उसका डेटा लेते हैं तो एक जो मिसट्रस्ट इकट्ठा होता है, वो इंसान आगे चल के किसी पे ट्रस्ट नहीं कर पाता है. मेरी ट्रूथ फॉर एग्जाम्पल, स्टटर करना, अब कई बच्चे आजीवन के लिए स्टटरिंग शुरू हो गया, so they will obviously not forgive the researcher on whom they had complete trust and faith. And what did the researcher do? Deceive the child and led them into becoming stutterers. So that's the harm that deception does. You must read some of these examples. Debriefing अभी मैंने आपको एक्सप्लेन किया था बहुत विस्तार में. इसके ऊपर भी APA के एथिक कोड 8.08 लगता है. हर डायमेंशन के ऊपर there are codes which are identified and specified. You all understand what debriefing means. I am not explaining it again. Confidentiality, anonymity, and the concept of privacy. Privacy is people's access to information about an individual. Particularly when you do research on sexual behavior or on, let's say, familial conflicts. These are very personal and private matters. Till such time that the couple feels that we do not want to approach the court, we as researchers don't have a right to get into their conflict zone at all. Once they reach the court and seek divorces, then they become open to scrutiny. But before that, if somebody says that tell us, we'll help you out, we don't have a right to get into people's families or their problems. Ethical issues and non-human subjects. We have read a lot of experiments. जितना initial research was, सब animals पे हुआ. I'm sure Shruti ma'am must have given you examples of rats and monkeys and pigeons and pigs. Yes. A whole lot, and she actually must be enacting them all also, that ऐसे ऐसे चल के गया हुआ और ऐसे हुआ. So the point for us is that that was the beginning of research for us. Till such time that human beings became the guinea pigs, and because the animals were not available to us, so we had no choice but to turn the humans into guinea pigs. And today all kind of research has been conducted on human beings. All kind within quotes. हर किस्म की research जो document भी की जा रही है, बहुत बारी undocumented जा रही है, लेकिन उनके research protocols बन गए या treatment protocols बन गए. क्योंकि अगर उस research को disclose कर दिया जाएगा, तो it can be a big हल्ला or a big documented story which will come into the news. So it's important that everything doesn't come into the forefront. Internet research is another very important dimension on which ethics have started to play an important role. Particularly during COVID-19, a lot of research, so much so even our students who were in final year then, but this concept of Google Form started at that time. सारा research Google Form पे हुआ. और काउंसलिंग में हम कहते हैं कि गूगल फॉर्म की बेसिस पे या काउंसलिंग which is not face to face is ineffective counseling because you are not able to catch the nuances, the non-verbal behavior which is equally important. So इंटरनेट पे रिसर्च वो जरूर रही है, लेकिन एक प्रश्न चिन्ह हर चीज के. वो फॉर्म जो बच्चे को भरना था 13 से 18 साल में, क्या वाकई में वो भर रहा है या उसके पेरेंट्स भर रहे हैं, या उसका कोई सिबलिंग, ओल्डर सिबलिंग इस पे नहीं था। घर में बैठे हुए वो इंसान कितना सच और कितना झूठ बोल रहा है वो आप नहीं कैच कर सकते थ्रू द गूगल फॉर्म। वो तभी पकड़ा जाता है जब आप फेस टू फेस बैठते हैं, डेटा कलेक्ट करते हैं, उसके 4 सवाल आते हैं, इसका क्या मतलब है। ये जरूरी तो नहीं है कि अंग्रेजी का हर शब्द हर बच्चे को समझ आ जाए। There are times where the underlying meaning is entirely different. So children want to understand कि ये statement का क्या मतलब है। When you do EPQR, you say my mother is a good woman. Yes or no? Just today morning I had a fight with my mother. Will I say she is nice? You want to say no, लेकिन क्या करोगे? Social desirability dimension आ जाती है। फिर आप ना बोलते बोलते भी हाँ ही बोलते। खाना खाने से पहले मैं हाथ धोता हूँ, क्या सब बच्चे हाथ धोते हैं? कोविड से पहले तो शायद कोई भी नहीं धोता था। तो इस तरीके से जब बहुत सारे सवालों का चर्चा होती है, researchers come to point of contention will say that probably there is a question mark on internet research and risk involved in it. Very important dimension to keep in mind. Debriefing and internet research again, आपको पता ही नहीं डेटा क्या आ रहा है, पार्टिसिपेंट का क्या हो रहा है, is the individual even interested in listening to what I'm saying? I don't have the time. बस आपने बोला था फॉर्म भरना है, भर दिया मैंने, काम किया तो I'm not interested in your objectives. आप करो जो आपको करना है। If that is the kind of response you get from your subject, where is the relevance of research? Research is relevant when people have 10 questions coming through. ये क्यों ऐसे, कैसे करेंगे, क्या दिक्कत होगी, अच्छा इस शब्द का क्या मतलब है, हर बारीकी में जो जाएगा इंसान, that's the individual who has truly filled up your form. Right? So we have to go into that depth to do justice to the research that we are doing. Debriefing again require the participant to provide an email address so that a debriefing statement can be sent to them. I am not interested. I am not ready to reveal my name, leave alone my email. There is the role of debriefing. Right? Provide a lead the study radio button on every page that will direct them to the debriefing page. Incorporate a debriefing page into the program, driving the experiment that directs the participant to this page if the study is terminated prior to completion. आपने कभी Google फॉर्म भरा है?
Yes, ma'am.
Next आता है ना?
Yes, ma'am.
So ideally next के साथ में debriefing room भी होना चाहिए. That when you click you have a debrief कि अब तक जो आपने भरा उसका ये मतलब है. How many times you are asked to do that or how many times have you sought that information? Never. हो रहा है ना? चल हो गया. The casual approach in research is where what is undermining research. और इसीलिए शायद आज हमारे the Isaacs and the Guilfords are less in the middle. And we are still relying on those 1909 studies and researches. Ethical issues must be considered at each step in the research process. So whatever research process you are in, now this is a matrix that we must always keep in mind. The good ends, the bad ends, the good means and the bad means. Ethical research will always have good means will have good ends. Good means will have bad ends if the subjective ethic backfires. Similarly, bad means there will be Machiavellian research in becoming scheming कि हो गया काम, या फिर कुछ ऐसा डायमेंशन निकलेगा जो बेसिक स्टडी है वो कुछ और है और जो आपको कन्वे की जा रही है वो कुछ और है. Unethical research, bad means, bad ends, no harm, whether it's psychological, it is physical, no kind of harm should be there. Fraud. Now these are lapses in integrity. जो हम fraud करते हैं, plagiarism करते हैं, that's all प्लेगरिज्म, कट कॉपी पेस्ट की रिसर्च जो आजकल हो रही है, बिल्कुल नॉनसेंसिकल रिसर्च, अपना दिमाग अप्लाई ही नहीं करने की जरूरत है। 4 रिसर्च पेपर उठाए, उसमें से अपना एक रिसर्च पेपर निकाल, अनएथिकल कंप्लीटली। With that, we come to an end to ethics. Do you have any questions? In fact, I think one of you must.
Yes.
That's news enough to create a case history. I'm sure you've also read how they are trying to historically trace it, which means that case histories can be longitudinal as well, which means you identify a case and start to pick it up both in retrospective as well as in future. कि आने वाले सालों में ये कैसे होगा? You pick up a little child. Burke's book, for example, Developmental Psychology. Burke has worked on her own child and then written the book after the child turned 15, because she was so meticulously observing the child 24/7, every movement of the child. बोलते हैं हर हरकत की जॉटिंग चलती है, वो केस स्टडी है, वही खूबसूरत केस स्टडी in which you are able to cover all those dimensions which are important, right? So when we are going to talk about the case study, this is how we break it up. Just like all other questions, we will begin with a definition given by different authors, the features which are an important dimension, the aim of the case study, why is it important to read or make a case study, the types of case study, intrinsic versus instrumental, single versus multiple, descriptive versus explanatory, finally the advantages and the disadvantages. Parul, if it's okay, can we shut the door please? Just keep moving up and down. I'm sure the ones who have to come. Agar थोड़ा सा खुला खोल दो, in case a child is late. All right. So it's a crucial type of non-experimental. Another important dimension that it's non-experimental. You don't essentially call people to the lab to be able to conduct any intensive scaling procedures on the individual. However, even that can be done. अगर आपको लगता है, जैसे कल हमने एडवांसमेंट ऑफ कॉग्निटिव साइंस की बात की थी, जिसके लिए हमें उनके न्यूरल नेटवर्क्स पढ़ने के लिए उन्हें एमआरआई में डालना जरूरी था, उसी तरीके से अगर आप कोई ऐसी केस स्टडी करना चाहते हैं जिसमें आपको डिटेल में कोई डायमेंशन पढ़ने की जरूरत है, तो आप एक इंटेंसिव स्टडी भी कर सकते हैं, बट लार्जली दे आर नॉन एक्सपेरिमेंटल इन नेचर. In-depth, detailed investigation, as Manu very rightly pointed out. It's idiographic in nature. When we use the term idiographic, we are talking about one individual, one place, one event at a time, which can be about a person, family, organization, or an event. Within psychology, it is used in many areas such as the psychoanalytical approach. You all have read Freud, haven't you?
Yes, ma'am.
So you understand the minutest detail of what psychoanalysis is all about, what Freud tells us, the retrospective, recurrent, and prospective. All the dimensions can be created by using the approach. It can have a developmental approach, the study of individual differences, etc. Within individual differences, it can cover dimensions such as personality. Yes, please come.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. And age disability. All those of you who are walking in late, please remember to get yourself marked because I finished with the attendance already. Case study is also a method of inquiry which generates rich, mostly qualitative. Yukta and the child with you, what is your
Sanvi.
name? Sanvi. Why don't I remember your name? Alright. Qualitative. Descriptive detail about a unique individual episode or situation. Obviously, if you are making a case study, the person is unique. The situation is intriguing. That is why you want to conduct an in-depth study on it. there has to be something very distinct about it. Come in, Method. As a method of research, the case study is said to be ecologically valid, which means no matter which environment the individual is living in, या कहाँ पर वो हादसा हुआ और वो क्यों जरूरी है हमारे लिए पढ़ना. So ecological validity is another important dimension. Coming to the definitions, good and hard, best and kind, they talk about case studies being an in-depth study of one situation or a case. We use the term idiographic just now. So that's what is visible in the definition also, which may be one subject, group or event. Case study to a psychologist means a study of an individual person, usually in a problematic situation. Manu picked up the example of a clinical sample. Clinic में कोई आता है, उसके ऊपर केस बनाया जाता है, तो वो केस स्टडी. So when we are using the term problematic situation, we are talking about taking an example in a department of psychiatry. It can be somebody who walks up to you and has reported problems. It can be an individual who's experienced an earthquake or a flash flood somewhere, and post-traumatic stress disorder is what one is suffering from. Such individuals become distinct individuals on whom case studies become interesting, and also you are contributing to the existing body of knowledge. Already हमारे पास बहुत सारा research हर dimension के ऊपर available है, लेकिन वो distinct इसलिए है क्योंकि अब area नया है और problem के शायद features कुछ अलग निकल के आए. जरूरी नहीं है कि जो आपने पहले पढ़ी है case studies वही repeat हो रही हैं हर बार. Each individual is different, each event is different, so obviously the case study that you will prepare will also have its own distinct features. Now, according to Freud's analytical approach, a case study can be retrospective, that is, it collects rich, qualitative, descriptive detail about the participant's life. Such case studies require part of self-report from the side of an individual. This is known as introspection, because you want the individual to unveil whatever problems he is facing and why one is facing. Flash floods to सभी ने experience किया. Why is it that some people report problems subsequent to it and the others have adjusted well? What is the skill that the others have that you don't have? So that's where the distinction comes. Such case studies require part of self-report from the side of an individual. We just spoke about the longitudinal case study, and I gave you the example of work school. One of the very meaningful studies that have been done in psychology. Apart from this, longitudinal studies are done on schizophrenics. In PGI, Department of Psychiatry, a study on schizophrenics has been on for the last 40 years. A young child who reported with symptoms is being followed up till date. And I remember when we used to go visit those people, most of the times their families would say, अब तो हमारा ये बच्चा बुजुर्ग हो गया है, अच्छा खासा है, आप लोग अभी भी हमारा पीछा भी छोड़िए. Are you in the right class? I don't know you. What is your name?
Abhishek.
Hello, Abhishek. I don't know you at all. Have I ever met you? I think
yes,
I've
on the
spoken to you on the phone maybe once.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
said I want to get my file checked, right?
Yes, ma'am.
But I haven't seen you, so I felt probably it's the wrong child. Alright. So welcome, Abhishek. Research methodology. Are you still working somewhere, Abhishek?
No, ma'am, I left.
You left the job.
Yes, ma'am.
Nathrik, how about you? छोड़ दी? अब रोज रोज कॉलेज आओगे? 11 बजे. याद रहेगा ना? Good. चलिए. So when we are talking about longitudinal studies, I was giving you the example of schizophrenic patients being followed up even after 40 years. And well, sometimes people have not told their spouses that I once experienced those symptoms. So they get very hesitant. I remember the minute the Department of Psychiatry vehicle, because we had a vehicle which had PGI and all written on it, they used to hate it, कि ये फिर आ गया. कि फिर वही सवाल पूछेंगे। 40 साल हो गए हैं, पीछे ही नहीं छोड़ रहे हैं। तो आप देखिए, it can sometimes become problematic for the patient who once reported some symptoms, और शायद पता नहीं confirmed या थे भी या नहीं थे, क्योंकि 40 साल पहले जो हुआ वो आज बताने वाला भी कोई नहीं है। तब के जो प्रोफेसर वो सब रिटायर हो गए। By the time we all joined, I'm sure Shruti and Rohini who joined after me in PGI must have also done the same task. I'm not sure whether they were part of that study or not. But however, now these are some of the problems that you have when you're doing longitudinal studies. People get fed up. There are times when people pass away. So there is a break in the kind of information that you get. But yes, till such time that you can follow up with the people, longitudinal case studies become very meaningful in research. Does someone have a question to ask me? Actually, I think you are aware of all this.
Yes.
This is nothing new that is happening in front of you. Yes, Abhishek?
Yes, ma'am.
हाँ, सब पता ही होता है, क्या कुछ नई बात थोड़ा कर दी है। चलिए, idiographic approach I just explained to you. When you're talking about one individual, one event, one issue at a time. Attention to contextual data. उस individual या उस event से related, उस context में जो भी important चीजें हैं, जब हम उसको corroborate करते हैं और उसमें से dimensions उभारने की कोशिश करते हैं, that's where the focus is on attention to contextual data. Flash floods आए, क्या ये पहली बार आपने experience किया? You are 60 years of age. Have you never seen a flash flood over here? Why is it that in the past when it happened you did not face so many problems? How is it that age and let's say post-traumatic stress disorder is increasing? So आपके related dimensions जो उभर के आते हैं, वो subsequent research के मुद्दे बनते हैं. Are you following this?
Yes, ma'am.
Triangulation. Now when we talk about triangulation, we are trying to understand the individual in between and a triangle that is created. That is the sources of information. एक बच्चे के ऊपर अगर हमने केस स्टडी बनानी है, let's say एक ऑटिस्टिक बच्चा है, तो वो ऑटिस्टिक बच्चा कौन से स्कूल में जाता है? क्या वो नॉर्मल स्कूल में जाता है या स्पेशल स्कूल? वहाँ पर उसका बिहेवियर कैसा है? उसके टीचर से, उसके दोस्तों से, घर में रहने वाले उसके पेरेंट्स से, और हर बच्चे का एक स्कूल का फ्रेंड्स का ग्रुप होता है, एक घर के फ्रेंड्स का ग्रुप होता है. सो ट्रायंगल हमारा कंप्लीट हो गया, टेकिंग इंफॉर्मेशन फ्रॉम ऑल सोर्सेज पॉसिबल टू अंडरस्टैंड does the child behave the same way in all situations or is it different with different individuals? That helps us to make the case study even more elaborate and detailed, not excluding any kind of information. So that's where triangulation comes into handy when you're doing data collection about that particular individual, that particular event or that particular situation. Temporal element, again, when we are talking about temporal elements, we are talking about the time constraints or the time that has gone in between जब आपने शुरू की और जब आपने खत्म की, तो उस पूरे स्पैन में आपने क्या क्या बदलाव देखे. Each time you are meeting the individual, अगर वो अपनी information share करता है, आप भी जरूर कुछ ना कुछ share करें. Is he trying to learn from it? Is he trying to bring about a difference in his behavior, or time has no meaning? So that's where the temporal elements, the element deals with time which involves investigation of the occurrence over a period of time. Now this was Yin, who establishes how and why of a complex human situation in classic examples with the use of a case study. So किसी भी स्टडी को आप एक क्लासिक केस स्टडी बना सकते हैं डिपेंडिंग ऑन आप कितना इन डेप्थ उसको पढ़ते हैं. हर इंडिविजुअल के ऊपर एक केस स्टडी बनाई जा सकती है, एंड दैट्स प्रिसाइसली व्हाट वी विल डू. I have a set of scales which we will try and do today or maybe the next when we meet. Concern with theory. The case study facilitates theory generation. आप बहुत खूबसूरती से जब पढ़ाई करते हैं, वॉटसन की कहाँ से थ्योरी उभर के आई? एक छोटा सा एक्सपेरिमेंट उन्होंने किया, करते करते वो एक्सपैंड होते होते पूरी थ्योरी बनी. Look at Ising's 4 dimensions that very significantly we talks about. What is the emergence? When is it that the first time that the theorist actually felt कि ये dimension पढ़नी चाहिए? The G factor and the S factor, how did it come about? So gradually when you start to read each theory, which you are doing in theories and systems, I'm sure ma'am traces it right from the beginning. And till that time when the theory actually gets generated. So उसकी उपज basic क्या है? Edison for example, या वो यूरेका मूवमेंट जिसको हम बोलते हैं कि सडनली कुछ पता चल गया. So that's what happens when you are trying to create a theory out of something which happens every day. The apple used to fall every day. वो laws of gravitation में कब convert हो गए पता ही नहीं चला. वो बात अलग है कि आज उसके ऊपर भी बहस हो रही है कि शायद उनका कोई contribution है ही नहीं. Einstein has no contribution to the theory of gravitation. It was already there in our Vedas. So now there is a debate. I'm sure you, those of you who are interested in reading about these debates, must have read about it. The scientific community in Australia has challenged this entire theory of gravitation, that it has already been proven and documented. And people have just picked it up from the Vedas and taken credit for having done something which was already in existence. So when you are creating a theory, one has to be very sure that either be smart enough not to be caught, even if it's after about 50 years later, or else do actually something which nobody has done in the past. So it's important when you're making a case study, जो भी इंसान आपकी बनाई हुई केस स्टडी पढ़ता है उसको लगता है कि वाकई में जो आपने इंडिविजुअल पिकअप किया या इवेंट पिकअप किया वो इससे पहले कहीं डॉक्यूमेंटेड नहीं है. अदरवाइज पब्लिश नहीं होगा. लिखने में तो आप कुछ भी लिख सकते हैं. यू फाइंड योर ग्रैंडफादर द most interesting, most knowledgeable, the most important person, because for you your grandfather is most important, right? And you want to write a case study on your grandfather. So you will try and find out all those distinct features which your grandfather has and the others don't have, right? So aims of the case study, they are valuable as preliminaries to major investigations because they are not intensive and generate rich subjective data. They may bring to light variables, phenomena, processes and relationships that deserve more intensive information. The most popular usage of technology is to understand the development perspective of the problem as history is staged from birth onwards. I'm sure when you look back into your own lives, हमने एक term use किया था ना अभी introspection. Each one of us, if you start to search, अपने बचपन के कुछ चीजें जो लोग interested होते हैं, you ask your parents, and sometimes your parents themselves say, जब ये छोटी थी तो ये ऐसे करती थी, आज तब इसका behavior बदल गया. बात नहीं करते हैं ना जब लोग, अरे ये तो वैसी ही दिखती है जब ये छोटी थी, यार, अरे you haven't changed, oh my God, you don't look like the same child anymore. So where do these things come from? Somewhere right from the day one is born till whatever age, 20, 25, whatever. So it's a useful method for assessment and gaining insight into problems being faced by the clients. This method collects information chronologically. When we are talking about chronology, we are talking about the date when you were born till today. And from here, if you plan to make it a longitudinal study, कि उसको cover करना है for the next 10 years or 20 years of the individual's life, कि इनमें distinct differences आ गए हैं. अब इनकी counseling करेंगे तो देखते हैं इनमें कितना फर्क आता है. So that's how chronology plays an important role. This method takes care to take information about the environment in which one is cared for, whether it's the home, it's the job, community, geographical features. The success of the case study depends on the rapport which one develops with the client. Very many times you find an individual very intriguing and you want to read about that individual, but the person is not able to open up with you. तो आप कहाँ से triangulation भी आपने try कर लिया, उसके बारे में आपको कहीं से कोई information ही नहीं दे रहा, सब चुप है. particularly when you do forensic psychology, in which you're dealing with either criminals or you're dealing with individuals who are antisocial elements. People don't want to associate with those individuals. So nobody will talk about that individual. और वो अपने बारे में भी बात नहीं करना चाहते. 2-3 of our students have been conducting studies in jails in Budel, in other places. And they sometimes find some criminals very tough to crack because basic information भी वो देने को तैयार नहीं होते, हमने बात ही नहीं करनी, चुप करके जाके कोने में बैठते हैं. Later when you try to find out and explore the reasons, so बहुत बार ऐसे उभर के आता है there are times when people have been subjected to punishment when they have not actually committed the crime. वो गलती से फ्रेम कर दिया और फंस गया. So ऐसे लोग they feel कि कुछ होना तो है नहीं. Why should I share my story with you? I've shared it enough. In spite of my sharing, I was sentenced to whatever number of years of imprisonment. So such individuals become very difficult patients on whom case studies can be developed. However, with a little more understanding, a little more compassion, a little more empathy, you can reach into their world, provided we are determined कि हमने लेके ही आनी है. So these are important dimensions. The success depends a lot on observational and inferential skills of the clinician, obviously. अब यहाँ पर आप इतने motivated हैं कि आपने बिना डेटा लिए वापस जाना ही नहीं है, तो आप बैठे रहेंगे. 10, 20, 25, 30 चक्कर भी काटेंगे till such time that you have not achieved your aim. One of our students, when Kasab, you know who Kasab is? 2611 में जिसने filing की थी Taj Hotel. One of our students was doing forensic psychology after doing MA with us, and he was deputed in Tihar jail to work with Kasab. He'll come and share his story himself someday when he's here in Chandigarh. But what he told us was absolutely observation and inferential skills, because Kasab just refused to talk. He was not ready to share any kind of information about himself or who was funding him or whatever was happening. So when you meet such individuals who you know are celebrities, criminals, he became a celebrity because of the kind of food he would ask for and all the minutest details he came and shared with us. And it was very interesting to hear such a study, which he also has documented somewhere. Now the types of case studies, intrinsic and instrumental, first, second is single and multiple. जब हम intrinsic case study की बात कर रहे हैं, so यहाँ पर the case study represents nothing but themselves. The cases are chosen because they are interesting, they are intriguing, they are distinct, they are unique. The researcher wants to know about them. For example, patients with rare diseases. कोविड जब नया नया आया था, बहुत लोगों ने कोविड पे काम किया, क्योंकि किसी को पता ही नहीं था कि ये एक नई सी कुछ नाम की वस्तु सडनली आ गई, और जिनको होता था ये भी बोला जाता था उनके पास नहीं जाना, चाहे वो आपके परिवार का हिस्सा है. Even when people passed away, people were not permitted to go for their cremation, even if it was somebody close in the family. So such studies become very intriguing. How is it that one can conduct studies, and such studies are then called intrinsic case studies. On the other hand, are the instrumental case studies, which constitute examples of a more general phenomenon. For example, bereavement, recovery from diseases. The case is selected in order to explore how the phenomenon exists within a particular case. For example, again I am taking COVID. Bereavement was something you did not want to put on the television because you could only see bad sides all the time. आप चाहकर या ना चाहकर, half the people went into stress and depression only looking at all that. You are protected, you are safe, you are not subjected to all this. Look at the number of medicos we lost in the course. all those young interns and the young doctors who were taking care of COVID patients eventually passed away. So that became like a huge problem, and a lot of people later decided I'm not going to send my child to become a doctor because पता नहीं अब ऐसे pandemics आने शुरू हो गए और क्या क्या है, which is again wrong. But so these are instrumental case studies, these which set examples for subsequent learning. Single versus multiple cases, the name suggests, one individual, one event at a time, or else you're picking up similar schizophrenics हैं, बहुत सारे schizophrenics जो OPD में आ रहे, सबके ऊपर आप study कर रहे हैं. Common feature is they are all suffering from schizophrenia. Descriptive versus explanatory. Descriptive is a detailed description of the phenomena within its context. The case is not explored in terms of existing theoretical formulations. Explanatory case study. This case study aims to generate explanation for the occurrences which they are concerned. Now when we are talking about explanatory case studies, यहाँ पर हम context की बात कर रहे हैं. Descriptive के अंदर केवल describe आप कर रहे हैं. Explanation के अंदर पूरे context को, पूरे environment को साथ में जोड़ रहे हैं. And then you are trying to work out newer variables. कि ये भी study हो सकती है. ये भी एक important dimension है जिसके ऊपर हम काम कर सकते हैं. So that's how explanations become important. Sources of case study can be as simple as you're walking on the road, you find something. I give this example all the time because when I saw the golden car for the first time, I found it very intriguing. Who is it that you would want to ride in a golden car? Because normally people would like a white, grey, black. ये normal colors होते हैं. एक distinct सा रंग की गाड़ी जब आपके सामने से गुजरती है, आपको लगता है कि कैसा इंसान है जिसने इतनी हट के रंग चूज किया. या उसके ऊपर ग्राफिटी कर लेते हैं, कई लोग गाड़ियों के ऊपर करते हैं ना, कार्निवल के टाइम कर लेते हैं, and then they want to stay with that car at all times. Why is it that some people want that kind of attention? So, sources of case study can be any. It can be personal documents, it can be the life history, related persons, for example, social relationships of the subject, official records. These give information on the social and academic life of the subject. Whichever case study you pick up, there are hazard sources from where you can access that information about that individual. These are the subject himself always is the best choice. जब वो नहीं बोलता है, तब आपको दूसरे sources explore करने की जरूरत पड़ती है. क्योंकि जो चीज आप अपने बारे में जानते हैं, वो चीज आपके बारे में कोई नहीं जानता. Even the closest, your parents with whom you live 24/7 may not know some parts of you which only you know. And so when you introspect and you want to identify, these are the pros, these are the cons, I want to work on my strengths and weaknesses. How does one do it? People don't tell you these are your strengths and weaknesses. We do it ourselves. वो जो डेली रात को डायरी लिखते हैं ना, हम अपनी सब लिखते हैं. साइकोलॉजी स्टूडेंट्स तो सब लिखते हैं. आपको बताया नहीं था BA1 की टीचर ने? Anyway, हाँ? नहीं बताया था. ये तो BA1 के बच्चों को बोलते हैं. Start writing your diaries. Make a journal of your life, which is the most beautiful journal. Because what your diary knows about you, nobody will ever know.
Anne Frank type.
Huh?
Anne Frank.
Yes, why not? Why not? Provided we are truthful to our life. That's very important. Because आपकी strengths, आपकी weaknesses, over time we start to make a difference in our own lives. Because आज से 5 साल पुरानी जब डायरी पढ़ते हो, आप कहते हो यार ऐसे नहीं किया था मैंने. But that's not nice. Today when we have evolved, then you start to find faults within ourselves. कि तब मैंने ये किया था तो ये गलत था. उसने मुझे सब्जी वाले ने 5 रुपए एक्स्ट्रा दे दिए और मैंने ले लिए. Giving the logic that he cheats me every day, one day he's given me extra तो क्या हो गया? है ना, हमारा लॉजिक हमारे साथ हर चीज के लिए हमेशा साथ रहेगा। मुझे अपने वो क्लास 1 केजी में या फर्स्ट में मुझे अपने नेबर का पेंसिल बहुत अच्छा लगता था, तो मैंने वो पेंसिल रख दिया अपने बैग में और उसको बोला मैं वो घर में ही यूज करूंगा, कॉलेज स्कूल में नहीं लाऊंगा। चिल्ड्रन डू दीज काइंड ऑफ थिंग्स। तो वो कोलबर्ग की थ्योरीज आ जाती है ना, प्री कन्वेंशनल, कन्वेंशनल, पोस्ट कन्वेंशनल, कि कौन सी उम्र सबसे खूबसूरत है बच्चे को ये डिस्टिंक्शन बताने के लिए, ये सही है ये गलत है। जो तुम्हारे बैग में पेंसिल है वो तुम्हारी है, जो दूसरे की वो उसकी है, वो उसकी पेंसिल अपने बैग में डालना गलत है। तो ये बच्चे को कैसे समझाते हैं? So this is how we start to make a difference in our own lives once we start to do these little things, add these little things in our life and we start to learn by ourselves. Coming back to the steps, most important is the status of the situation or the unit of attention. केस स्टडी किसकी, कब, क्यों, why is it intriguing, क्या फायदा होगा इसके ऊपर केस स्टडी बनाने का। So status of the situation, unit of attention, दूसरा है collection of data। इन सब्जेक्ट से आप खुद से बात करेंगे, ट्रायंगुलेट करेंगे या कोई सेकेंडरी सोर्सेज से इंफॉर्मेशन गैदर करेंगे। I gave you the example of let's say flash floods, अयोध्या, क्यों उसके ऊपर अगर आपने केस स्टडी लिखनी है तो कहाँ से लिखना शुरू करेंगे? How long back can you trace and what will be the sources of information? Historical documents कहाँ से आप खोज के लाएंगे? केस स्टडी, डेटा एनालिसिस एंड रिपोर्ट राइटिंग। जब सारा डेटा कलेक्ट हो गया, सब कुछ आपने इकट्ठा कर लिया, फिर आप बैठते हैं उसके ऊपर एक रिपोर्ट बनाने या अपना पेपर तैयार करते हैं, जिसमें ना केवल आप वो डॉक्यूमेंट करते हैं द नैरेटिव्स दैट यू हर्ड फ्रॉम इंडिविजुअल्स, बट आल्सो द सेकेंडरी सोर्सेज दैट यू नीडेड टू go to collect data about that particular individual. Now each case must be intensively analyzed as a separate entity. In a collective or comparative case study, the analysis has to go one step further by also conducting a cross-case analysis. उसी केस को दूसरे केसेस के साथ में कंपेयर करते। The final report should provide a deep understanding of the case and also discuss the validity of the strategies used. We talk in terms of reliability and validity. आप एक imaginary case study नहीं बना सकते हैं. It has to be on the ground. वो हादसा होना चाहिए, तभी उसका जिक्र important है. Many years ago, nobody had ever imagined AI would do so much for us, right? Today we've accepted it. Our phones carry AI all the time. आप सोच रहे होते हैं आपका फोन वही चीजें दिखाना शुरू कर देते हैं, वो रिसीव कर रहा है ना आपके सब मैसेजेस। आज से 10 साल या 15 साल पहले कभी सोचा था कि ऐसा भी हो पाएगा? So that's how when you go into the future, how far can you think, right? That's how case studies are intensive. Advantages: in-depth quantification of information, ecological validity, that is, it is real and situation based. Time series analysis, where we are talking about the longitudinal dimensions. Testing theories, जो हो गया और जो हम अपनी केस स्टडी में से उभार के एक नई थ्योरी खड़ी करेंगे, वो भी संभव है अगर हम बहुत इंटेंसिवली काम करते हैं और बहुत दिनों तक काम करते रहते हैं, तो वो आगे चल के थ्योरी के फॉर्म ले सकती है, प्रोवाइडेड वी आर मोटिवेटेड इनफ टू गिव इट दैट शेप. Provides a suitable hypotheses. Researcher gets sufficient facts, not only used as the main method but also used to supplement other research methods. It adopts a holistic approach to a problem. The case study is a mode of organizing data in terms of some chosen units such as the person's life history, the history of a group or society. Now these are different examples. आपने कौन सा चूज किया केस स्टडी बनाने के लिए? Now this is also your task for this weekend. Monday we will discuss the case studies. Each one of you will find one distinct individual or an event to write about. Very brief. ताकि हम एक दिन के अंदर ही सबका डिस्कशन करें. Is that okay? Try to do it so that you are able to actually incorporate most of these things. Finally, in case study, the researcher gets sufficient fact for making a comparison between two similar social units. Case study also provides an opportunity for careful examination of all those relevant facts and data on the basis of which a questionnaire or any psychological test is to be developed. So, AI, SPSS पे काम करना, who are doing work in that area, who is developing these kind of softwares, how is it enhancing? अब आप देखिए पियर्सन कोरिलेशन जब हम हाथ से करते हैं तो हमको कितना टाइम लग जाता है. केवल 12 या 15 का हमने डेटा लिया था, आपको याद है जब हमने पहला सम किया था.
Yes, ma'am.
अब आप जब 1000 लोगों के ऊपर पियर्सन कोरिलेशन लगाएंगे तो सोचिए तो कितना टाइम लगा होगा. When we were doing our PhD, I remember the guide telling me कि आपने कंप्यूटर से जनरेट करा लिया लेकिन इसे काउंटर चेक जरूर करिए, चाहे 2 वेरिएबल्स को उठा के करिए कि डेटा राइट डायरेक्शन में है कि नहीं. 400 का डेटा एक ग्रुप में और 400 दूसरे ग्रुप में, तो आप जब कंपेयर करते हैं तो आप सोचिए कितनी बड़ी शीट्स लगाते थे हम लोग और उसके ऊपर ये एनालिसिस हाथ से करने की कोशिश करते थे. इतना पूरा ऐसे भर जाता था, उनको नीचे न्यूज़पेपर बिछा के पहले टेप जोड़ते थे, उसके ऊपर वो शीट को जोड़ के फोल्ड करके फिर वो मैप को दिखाने लेके जाते थे. So those are the intensive nature of quantification of data that was done. आजकल क्या हो गया, SPSS में डेटा डाला, एक्सेल की फाइल से SPSS में कॉपी किया, इतना साफ आंसर सामने आ जाता है. रिलायबिलिटी, वैलिडिटी, सिग्निफिकेंस सब कुछ निकल रहा है, आपको हाथ से कुछ करने की जरूरत ही नहीं पड़ती. So this is development over time, and these are all part of case studies. So disadvantages, poor reliability and validity, because it's a very subjective approach. जो वो कह रहा है आप मान रहे हो, जो उसके बारे में आप सुन रहे हो वो मान रहे हो. So it's subjective, so reliability, validity obviously low. No cause and effect conclusions. Ethical concerns are the most important disadvantage in the case study. I just gave you example of the criminal who wants to sit in the corner and not talk about it. He is not giving you consent, लेकिन आपको लगता है मुझे बाकी सब छोड़कर उसी पे काम करना, क्योंकि वो बात नहीं कर रहा. Right? तो केस स्टडी तो उन्हीं पे बनती है जो डिस्टिंक्ट है, यूनिक है, लेकिन वहाँ पर आप उनके एथिकल कंसर्न्स को सबको बाईपास करते हैं, उनकी प्राइवेसी में इन्फ्रिंज कर रहे हैं, कॉन्फिडेंशियलिटी ब्रेक कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि कहीं ना कहीं तो वो केस स्टडी आप डिस्कस जरूर करेंगे. Right? It cannot be replicated. Every individual is unique, so it cannot be replicated. Idiographic in orientation, usually one individual at a time. Is it time? Restless क्यों हो गए हो? हो गया time? ठंड लग रही है. As I always say, wear one layer extra and come. Costly method in terms of time and money both. It looks deceptively simple. क्या है? कुछ भी नहीं है. लेकिन जब लिखने बैठते हैं तो डेटा कुछ मिलता ही नहीं है. आप एक पेज भी प्रॉपर्ली डॉक्यूमेंट्स नहीं कर पाते जब आप एक्चुअल में एक केस स्टडी बनाते हैं. The methodology is not reliable. Why is the methodology not reliable? Because हर इंडिविजुअल के लिए या इवेंट के लिए आपको एक नई मेथोडोलॉजी बनानी पड़ती है. सो वो जो स्टैंडर्डाइज्ड मेथोडोलॉजीज हैं, स्टैंडर्डाइज्ड सैम्पलिंग मेथड्स हैं, वो कामयाब ही नहीं है. हर जगह के हिसाब से, हर इंसान के हिसाब से आपको मेथोडोलॉजी डेवलप करनी है. So that's where it becomes not reliable. Susceptible to post hoc fallacy when the effects are wrongly attributed to the fact they are simply associated. When we are talking about post hoc fallacy, we are talking about things which are accepted. आज मैं छतरी लेके जाऊँगा ना तो बारिश नहीं आएगी, ये हमारी सोच है, क्योंकि पहले जब जिस दिन छतरी नहीं होती उस दिन बारिश जरूर आती है. So the moral of the story is carry a छतरी with you all the time in your bag. Now that's a post hoc fallacy. ये हमारी सोच है, क्योंकि कभी ऐसे हुआ, for example, वो काली बिल्ली रास्ता काटती है, क्या होता है? अपशगुन। मानते हैं ना, जो लोग मानते हैं। This color is lucky for me, or this dress is lucky. I'm going to wear this always for my exam. There are some people who follow that also. कि रोजाना या हर इम्तिहान में वो वही कपड़े पहनते हैं। These are all issues you created for yourself. कितना सच है, कितना गलत है, दूसरे को लगता है क्या है। This is that has no basis, no logic, no rationale. But for that individual, it's important. So post hoc fallacy is to be believed when you are talking in terms of a case study. It is difficult to decide when to stop collecting data. There is no end point. You want the light on? I can't ask you want the fan on. In the retrospective approach, the subject may forget or purposefully falsify data. Another advantage of writing a diary is tomorrow when you become a celebrity, your diaries can be used and they can be documented as biographies, right? You don't know who is a celebrity tomorrow. So, retrospective approach, the subject may forget or purposefully falsify data. Now, distribution in personal documents, letters, may provide a pessimistic or optimistic approach. As long case studies are confounded by many factors as ordinal studies, they lack validity and reliability. Do you remember confounding? What does confounding mean?
Variables.
Confounding variables पढ़े थे ना पिछले semester में?
Hidden.
क्या मतलब था?
जो hidden variables affect करते हैं
which affect the independent, right? But they are equally important for us. So in a case study, confounding variables वो कौन सी चीजें हैं जो affect करती हैं आपके data को? Sometimes you don't yourself don't. The chief danger is the response of the researcher itself. The researcher comes to feel a false sense of certainty about the conclusions he arrived at. The consequences of this is the temptation to ignore the principles of research design, which means if the researcher is biased towards a certain dimension, तो वो उन्होंने जो अपना hypothesis बनाया है वो उसी को prove करते हैं. Whether it is right or wrong, we are not going into the intensity of it or trying to prove it wrong. हमने जो सोच लिया वही सच है, and that's where case studies are often misreported. As I said earlier, they look deceptively simple. Statistical inferences obviously cannot be. Any kind of statistics cannot be applied. The only thing that you can apply maybe is a content analysis. वो भी बहुत खूबसूरती से नहीं लगता है. आमतौर पे सिर्फ descriptive, qualitative data के ऊपर हम लोग rely करते हैं, and we believe whatever the subject is telling us, or people living in that area whatever they are telling us. Earthquake आया, क्यों आया, कैसे आया, वो नहीं उन्हें पता, लेकिन उसका loss क्या हुआ, या कितने लोग उसमें जीवित नहीं रहे, वो सब ज़्यादा important हो जाता है. So with this we come to an end to the case study. Does anyone have a question in mind? Anything